The October 15th, 2025 meeting of the Electricity as Vehicle Fuel Working Group is called to order. We have a quorum present.
Recording in progress.
Okay. That's a good reminder that we do have several people online. And so Austin is going to help me here, taking note of who's here and when people have comments. Today is what I consider to be a really fun day because we're going to just hear and get some foundational information on our charge and the legislation that created us as a working group. And then we're also going to hear from two expert groups that are going to talk. But before we do that, I will just ask if everyone's had a chance to review the minutes from our first meeting. And are there any changes or concerns? All right. By the way, I'm Senator Ann Johnson Stewart. I should have introduced myself before we get started. Hearing no concerns or changes, is there a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Do I need a second?
Second.
I don't need a second. Okay. Well, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the last meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All opposed, say nay. All right, the motion prevails and the minutes are approved. So if you look at our agenda today, you'll see that we have really 4 different presentations. The first is a nonpartisan staff walkthrough of the relevant provisions for this group. And so with that, we have Matt Burness, who's LA with Minnesota House Research, and Tom Watson with Senate Counsel. Gentlemen, if you please come forward and give us a walkthrough of the relevant provisions of the transportation bill that brought us all together. So Matt and Tom, I'll let you introduce yourselves again.
As we're getting set up, good morning. I'm Matt Burris. I'm a legislative analyst with House Research in the Minnesota House, which is one of the nonpartisan legislative staffing offices in the House.
And I'm Tom Watson. I'm Senate Counsel in the Nonpartisan Office on the Senate.
So I'll begin and start with a little bit of background and history just to set a little bit of context before we get into the 2025 legislation. So for a number of years, the legislature had been electric vehicles and the transportation finance impacts, and that came to a sort of first step, if you will, in 2017 when the legislature enacted a surcharge on electric vehicles. It was set at a flat amount of $75, and this was imposed on all passenger type, all electric vehicles, so ones that were fully electric. And it was implemented as part of the motor vehicle registration tax. So at the same time of paying your tabs, the EV surcharge is imposed. Another aspect of that legislation was to create a type of grandfather clause in which the total due on motor vehicle registration, looking at both the registration tax and the EV surcharge, couldn't exceed what had previously been paid on the vehicle. So it kind of created a cap, if you will. The funds for that were directed into the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund, and that's one of the key constitutionally established funds that both collects and allocates revenue. And I think there'll be some further discussion in another presentation later today on the overall transportation finance structure. But suffice to say, for this, the money was directed to highways, both state and local highway systems under a series of formulas that kind of form the foundation of the transportation funding system for highways. So that was 2017, and then in the following years, there were a number of bills introduced and some degree of legislative discussion around modifications or alternative approaches. This included some proposals to just increase the rate by various amounts, incorporate charges or a similar charge for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and then there were some other approaches that were considered involving electric motorcycles, as well as just an entirely different kind of way of obtaining revenue kind of in this field. One of those methods, I think, had been mentioned in a little bit of discussion in a prior working group meeting of a road usage charge. So the basis would be more on along the lines of amount of vehicle miles traveled, amount of use of the road system. And then the electric fuel tax was also a proposed approach. And as we see, that came about in 2025 legislation. So one of the changes made in 2025 was to modify the electric vehicle surcharge, and there were several aspects to what was changed. First, instead of a $75 flat amount, a formula was put into place, and there's a fair amount to the formula. I won't go through a lot of detail. You can see it on the slide, but I'll touch on a couple of aspects. Second change in this legislative modification was to expand the surcharge to also include plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So previously it had just been all electric, and then a second surcharge or a separate surcharge for plug-in hybrids was also instituted. And the grandfather clause was removed so that the amount due under the surcharge was not limited based on prior registration tax. So basically, there was a decoupling of the amount paid in a given year for a vehicle compared to prior years under the registration tax. And this was set up to, or is set to go into effect January 1st of 2026. So there was a delay in the legislation between when it was enacted this past summer and when implementation begins. So the formula basis is essentially a percentage of the manufacturer's suggested retail price, kind of the list price, and that percentage is at different levels for EVs and plug-in hybrids, and is also set to decline as the vehicle ages. This is tied to or kind of mapped to how the motor vehicle registration tax formula is structured, or a portion of that formula, so that as a vehicle gets older, the overall amount due for both the registration tax and now the EV surcharge declines. So older vehicles pay less. There's also, with the EV surcharge, a minimum amount that's specified. And for the first period, that's at $150 for an all-electric vehicle, and half that for a plug-in hybrid at $75. And then starting July 1, 2027, the amount is reduced, and it's reduced by $50 for all electric. So it drops down to a minimum of $100. And for plug-in hybrids, it drops to $50, and that's the minimum annual amount that is imposed. Of note, that date for when the drop in the minimum happens coincides with the imposition of the new electricity as a fuel charge. So just looking broadly at what has taken place and what kind of discussions have happened at the legislature over the last several years, I thought it might be helpful to just touch for a moment on some of the thinking that had been articulated in the legislative discussions. So in the context of the legislation in 2017, and really it's a discussion, there a line of thought that continues to today, arguably, is the anticipated and forecasted decline in revenue from the motor fuels tax. As you know, that's kind of an obvious driver in consideration of revenue streams and what will happen with gas tax revenue as the overall fleet is likely to shift increasingly to electric vehicles in which there's not gas tax revenue collected. So the 2017 focus is, at least one element is arguably that there's going to be foregone gas tax revenue, and establishing a surcharge would offset the lost revenue from that type of vehicle for which gas tax is no longer collected. And then in the ensuing years and through 2025, there have been a number of proposals that I touched on, and there's really some different perspectives in how to determine what might be considered fair share, or what might be a reasonable policy approach in offsetting revenue or maintaining transportation revenue. And then the 2025 legislation, from the standpoint of the EV surcharge, one could look at as changing the perspective. And foregone revenue is still, from the gas taxes, is still an underlying consideration. But what the formula basis of the EV surcharge is now in place really could be also viewed as having a basis on tax progressivity or regressivity. Essentially, the concept of those who have more funds are expected to pay more, and the kind of higher overall rate of the current surcharge with a declining element based on the vehicle age works something like a proxy for income or wealth. And I thought I'd just note that from the standpoint of kind of where different rationales and perspectives have kind of come down in the legislative discussions around the EV surcharge and the overall electric vehicle taxation space. And that brings us to a little bit more review of the 2025 legislative components.
Thanks, Matt. So I just want to sort of quickly walk through the 2025 legislation to orient you where these provisions are in law, and sort of a high-level summary of what they are. So if you want to go and look at them for yourself and study them. So the 2025 laws were passed as part of the Omnibus Transportation Bill. They will be mostly codified in statute. That is a process that takes time after it's passed, but right now they sit in Laws 2025, First Special Session, Chapter 8, Article 2. And so I'll have citations in here that are both to the laws, which are currently where they sit, and then they'll also be codified in statute at a different number. It's a little bit of a confusing way of how laws are structured, but so first, as Matt was discussing, there were the changes to section 168.013, the vehicle registration tax. So that's changes to the current statute registration taxes, and that modified the electric vehicle surcharge, as Matt discussed, and added the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle surcharge. And behind that, you can see the citations. The first citation is to the laws where they're currently can be found, and then where they will be in statute is after the semicolon there. The next sort of changes, sort of set of changes were to 296A, which is in the tax code. It's tax on petroleum and other fuels. And in addition to sort of adding the tax itself, the legislation added sort of the scaffolding required to impose the tax. So defining relevant terms, and I have the list of the relevant terms there, giving rulemaking authority to the Commissioner of Revenue to adopt rules relating to electricity sold as a vehicle fuel, which is a defined term there, and adding a requirement in sort of the rules around licensure for public charging stations. And so in the current laws, citation up there, you can find these provisions at sections 67 through 78. That's sort of the scaffolding and the tax. And then this is the actual provision that has the tax itself. That's laws section 76, and it will be codified at 296A.075. It imposes a tax of 5 cents per kilowatt hour on electricity sold as a vehicle fuel. This applies to public charging stations with a few exemptions. It does not apply to cars that are charged in a home. The proceeds of the tax will be deposited in the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. And as Matt mentioned, this goes into effect July 1st, 2027, and that's part of the reduction on the surcharge. And last but not least, the legislation established this working group at laws section 118. And I have the language here. I think it was reviewed last session, so I won't walk through it. But I will note that the second clause under duties does have a statutory reference, 168.013 subdivisions 1M and 1N, and that's a reference to the electric vehicle surcharge that was discussed on the earlier slide, just so you understand what that is. And that is the end of the very brief walkthrough.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Does anybody have any questions for either Tom or Matt? Sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know, Mr. Burris or Mr. Watson, if you can answer this, but on slide 5, you talked about a forecasted long-term revenue decline. You or the department, or could we get that? What, and I know it's hard because it's based on vehicle sales, but what that deficit amount would be?
Matt?
Madam Chair and members of the task force, I don't have an off the top of my head number. That is something that MnDOT produced. I can connect with folks from MnDOT and get that to the task force.
Yeah, thank you. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so Eric Rudine from MnDOT, I think I had asked you guys for that last month, and MnDOT said they were working on it. Eric, do you have any comment?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So we do have an estimate for the amount of gas tax that the average driver pays in Minnesota, and I think we've been asked to sort of present that information at an upcoming meeting of this work group. We've also done a pretty extensive report that was delivered to the legislature just last session that kind of talks globally about transportation funding and the gap, sort of the unmet need in transportation funding. So maybe we could provide that to committee staff and they could send it out to members if you're interested in looking at that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an important question. And Danny Gillis and I have been meeting with experts for the last month, and I've asked several people who's doing that research. It seems to be a challenging question to answer, but there are several groups who are working on getting something put together. You know, being somebody who in my profession puts together estimates, there's many ways that we can come up with a number for that. So even if we get a couple different opinions, I think it'd be valuable and informative for this group. So thanks for asking that. And thank you, Eric. Does anybody have any other questions for either of our presenters? Well, I'm grateful. Thank you to both Matt and Tom, because I think it sets the foundation for where we are and how we got here, and also what is our charge as a group working together. So I'm grateful for your time and for the effort you took to put this together. Thank you. All right, no questions on that one. We will bring up our next presenter, Mr. Brett Wilhite. Is Brett here? Oh. I'm sorry, I didn't see your name tag. All right, so Brett is Division Director with the Department of Commerce, and as you can see from the agenda, he will be talking about just this legislation from their perspective. So when you're ready, Brett. I do want to note, is Representative Murphy online? Okay, I just want to note that Representative Elkins is online, as is Senator Howe. So just want you to know that they're represented as well. So Brett, whenever you're ready, let us know.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I represent Murphy, too.
My name is Brett Wilhite, and I'm the Director of Commerce Department's Weights and Measures Division. During this presentation, you will learn the purpose and mission of the division, how the division's work impacts Minnesotans, how the recently passed Commerce Bill affects weights and measures, and their involvement with electric vehicle supply equipment. The Weights and Measures Division is Minnesota's oldest protection agency, dating back to 1885, as part of the Railroad and Warehouse Commission to address farmer complaints about inaccurate sales of grain. Since then, the division has evolved and has diversified and now provides equity in the marketplace for many industries in the state. This is done through ensuring the accuracy and transparency of weighing and measuring devices for goods and services that are sold by weight, measure, or count. Think about the transactions you make throughout your day and how many of them involve weight, measure, or count. Not only does the division protect consumers during those transactions, but we also serve the businesses themselves by promoting fair competition amongst competitors and helping to ensure that they too are not losing money needlessly with inaccurate equipment. The Weights and Measures staff strives every day to do our part in achieving the 5 department goals you see before you: protect the public interest, be a trusted resource, reduce economic barriers, engage in advancing efforts to mitigate climate change, and ensure a strong, competitive, and fair marketplace. The next 2 slides contain videos that the Commerce Department Communications team put together last year to show consumers what exactly the division does when conducting inspections at a grocery store and at a gas station.
I'm a Weights and Measures investigator. Today I'm performing an inspection of a gas station. Weights and Measures is a very important department that the state has for consumers. We ensure that people are getting an accurate transaction. What you're buying is what you're buying, and it's not harmful to your vehicles. It's important for businesses to not lose money. It's also important that the quality of products that people are buying are what they are advertised as such. Typically what I do is I'll announce myself at the gas station. I'll check their records, their delivery records, make sure that customers are getting the correct product. I'll inspect the underground storage tanks, make sure I don't detect any water, make sure that the quality of fuel is where it should be. From there, I'll measure gas at each individual pump, make sure that customers are getting what they pay for, make sure that businesses aren't losing money, make sure it's fair for everyone. I'll look for any mechanical issues, any environmental impacts such as leaking fuel. From there, give them a report, let them know what I find and what needs to be corrected. Follow up to make sure that the corrections have been made. I'm a Weights and Measures.
Sorry about that.
You like the music?
It is good. It's catchy.
It's catchy.
Here it comes again.
I'm a State of Minnesota Weights and Measures investigator. Today I am performing an inspection of your local grocery store. Along with that, I'm going to be checking all the scales to make sure that they're accurate, to make sure that the customer is getting what they pay for. During a scale inspection, I test the accuracy of the scale to ensure that it's accurate across the entire capacity of the scale. We also try to make sure that the business isn't losing any money, so it's important that the scales are accurate and within tolerance. After that, I'm going to perform a package inspection to make sure that tare weights are taken, to ensure that the customer is only paying for the contents of the actual item versus the packaging as well. Once the scale passes inspection, I'll put an approval sticker on the scale that shows it's been tested and found correct. So you can always look for that Commerce Department approval sticker when you go to your local grocery store.
While public interactions with inspectors is typically seen at grocery stores and gas stations, our inspectors can also be found across the state working with industries that are not so customer-facing. The first picture on the left shows our test equipment on a vehicle scale. The silver cart that you see contains 10,000 pounds of certified test weights, and there is a second cart in the truck, and is used to test the weighing elements on vehicle scales. Vehicle scales in Minnesota are used in the farming industry for commodities such as grain, feed, and fertilizer, construction and mining industries for sand, gravel, taconite, and other aggregates, and the timber industry, to name a few. As shown in the second picture from the left, our inspectors are using high-volume provers to check the accuracy of wholesale meters that can be found at refineries, terminals, ethanol and biodiesel plants, bulk fuel distributors, and airports. The middle picture displays our certified rail car that is used by the railroad industry to check the accuracy of in-rail scales used to weigh train cars. Minnesota houses the last remaining master scale with 110,000 pound capabilities in the nation. The last two pictures show weights next to an airport luggage scale and a livestock scale, which is located at the state fairgrounds. These pictures capture some of the depth of how involved in commerce our field inspectors are. While consumers may run into an inspector in the field from time to time, many may not know that the Minnesota Weights and Measures Division also operates 2 laboratories out of our Burnsville headquarters. When our division receives a consumer complaint about fuel quality, or our inspectors collect fuel samples during a routine inspection, those samples are delivered to our petroleum lab that runs the fuel samples through a battery of tests to ensure the products in Minnesota's marketplace comply with ASTM standards listed in Minnesota Statute 239. Pictured here is our automatic distillation unit, which essentially boils gasoline and diesel samples to determine boiling points of the sampled product. Those points are then compared to the ASTM specifications. Our other laboratory is a national leader in the metrology field, ensuring traceability of field standards and calibration equipment used not only by Minnesota's inspectors and service companies, but by other states' programs across the country. Our metrology team ensures that every standard used in Minnesota is traceable back to the official kilogram, which is maintained by the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in France through the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Pictured here is the Precision Mass Laboratory. In this lab, our trained metrologists calibrate 10 kg down to 1 using nationally accepted testing procedures. These measurements are performed under tight environmental controlled conditions to eliminate the impact of temperature and humidity on the measurements. This level of precision is needed to reduce the uncertainty of the measurement as much as possible so field standards can comply with NIST Handbook 44 requirements. The large balance that you see on the left in the photo is automated to reduce the uncertainty even further by eliminating the human component. So why EVSEs in Minnesota Weights and Measures? Because electricity sold as fuel equals a commercial measurement transaction. As electric vehicles become more widely adopted and charging stations become more abundant, there is more pressure to ensure that Minnesota consumers are getting what they're paying for when charging their vehicles, and that business owners are not giving away product due to inaccurate meters, much like when filling an internal combustion engine at a gas station. The kilowatt hour is the new gallon. Similar to the equipment on the right, which checks a gallon against the display at a retail motor fuel dispenser, the equipment on the left checks a kilowatt hour against the display of an EVSE. Minnesota's EV market is evolving and growing. When the legislative proposal to establish that EVSEs fall under Weights and Measures jurisdiction was drafted, the U.S. Energy Department listed 2,108 charging ports at 818 locations within our border. As of last week, those numbers show 2,770 ports at 1,031 locations, nearly a 30% increase. And while companies that produce EVSEs have been engaged in the process of developing uniform standards and regulations for inspecting and testing EVSEs through the National Council on Weights and Measures, there has not been any regulatory oversight on EVSEs in Minnesota. While Chapter 239 in statute grants the Weights and Measures Division the authority to annually inspect scales, State Statute 239.90, enacted as part of the Commerce and Cannabis Omnibus Budget and Policy Bill this past legislative session, formally establishes the Weights and Measures EVSE program. The language provided within the statute sets definitions, establishes the kilowatt hour as the method of sale, creates a program account to fund the inspection program, establishes labeling and advertising requirements, and allows for administrative rulemaking to incorporate the 2025 version of NIST Handbook 44. The language found within statute 239.90, except for the subdivisions creating our program account, establishing inspection fees, and allowing for rulemaking, is language taken from NIST Handbook 130, Method of Sale Section, 2023 edition. Minnesota does not adopt Handbook 130, but like Handbook 44, it is a standard that is produced from the National Consensus-Based Professional Not-for-Profit Organization, whose mission is to develop uniform and equitable weights and measures standards. What is Handbook 44? This handbook has served as a national model standard for measuring devices since 1949. The handbook is revised and published annually by the National Council on Weights and Measures, of which Minnesota is a member of. The purpose of the technical requirements within Handbook 44 is to eliminate from use weights and measures and weighing and measuring devices that give readings that are false, that are of such construction that they are faulty, or facilitate the perpetration of fraud. Commerce Department rules currently adopt the 2009 version of the handbook, and we will be looking to adopt the 2025 version, which contains permanent codes for EVSEs. Weights and measures goals for inspecting EVSEs align with goals for inspecting other, ensuring consistent and fair marketplace practices. We understand that even though regulatory authority over EVSEs is new to weights and measures, EVSEs themselves have been in place in our state for years. As more charging units are brought online, consumers should begin to see uniformity in signage and advertising, method of sale, and accuracy of meters. This will be most notable through the use of our tested and found correct stickers, which are currently found on other commercial devices throughout the state. Looking to the future, weights and measures will face some unique challenges. As more EVSEs enter the marketplace, we will need to gather the resources, equipment, technology, and personnel necessary to inspect, educate, and provide services in this field. We will face difficulties in locating all retail and commercial EVSEs within our jurisdiction, as well as determining ownership and responsible parties for EVSEs currently in place. We will need to diligently balance enforcement with innovation in a manner that is equitable for industry and consumers alike. Thank you for your time today and learning about the Commerce Department's Weights and Measures Division and our role in providing equity throughout Minnesota's marketplaces.
Thanks, Brett. Just as a reminder, EVSE stands for Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment. And Brett, I really appreciate the work you're doing, and we'll be needing you a lot as we approach our new method for charging a tax on kilowatt hours. So do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, Mr. Wilhite, you were given the authority by the legislature to go through, I think it was $100 per electric vehicle charging station to go through and inspect them. Have you started that or the rulemaking on that yet?
No, we have not. So the inspection fee will take place during the time of an inspection. So there aren't any fees collected until an actual inspection occurs, which we haven't started yet. We are currently beginning the process of rulemaking to adopt Handbook 44, the 2025 version. Once that has been adopted, then we can officially begin our inspections.
Do you have a timeline on when you think that rulemaking process will be completed?
I do not at this time.
And then when that's completed, I'm assuming you're going to be inspecting, Madam Chair, public and private, so you'll be looking at retail establishments as well as city halls, county commission, state parks,
If they're used for commercial transactions, yes.
public or private.
Correct.
Thank
Did
you.
you say private?
If,
You said public or private, and what was your answer?
yes,
Both?
if it's used for a commercial transaction.
Okay. Just as an aside, you don't have to go through me. We're just going to, I mean, I appreciate the formality, but he says we don't have to do that, and I trust him. All right, I see a question over here first, and then I'll get to everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, that was one question I was going to ask. If the station was providing the electricity for free, then it's not subject to the inspection, correct?
Correct.
And then, I represent the Minnesota auto dealers. And, a lot of them have charging stations at their dealerships. And just curious, after the rulemaking process is done, and the handbook is adopted, is there a plan for outreach in terms of what the requirements are then of what the stations need to, what metrics need to be, kind of how is that going to be unrolled?
Right. For existing equipment, we're going to have to tread lightly because, as I pointed out earlier, there is a lot of equipment in the field currently. And so the outreach will take place through the inspection itself. We're not going to go through and make any hard and fast, corrections. It's going to be about compliance based through the notes that are gathered through that initial inspection.
Brett, but it seems to me that the only people that have to have the inspection are the ones selling the electricity to begin with, right? So for anybody who's providing the charging for free, they're not subject to your inspections. It's only when the money changes hands.
Correct.
Okay, that seems implementable. Do you have any feedback on that? Okay, he's next, and then we'll keep going.
That was my question.
Oh, all right.
Asked and
Sir,
answered.
Brent Bentley.
Thank you. The 2,770 charging ports that are out there right now at around 1,000 locations, how many of those are private versus public? As in, how many of those are selling versus giving it away? Do you know?
I don't know. That's going to be one of the difficulties we have moving forward, is to actually locate those. That number was pulled off the U.S. Department of Energy's website.
Okay.
And so I'm going to have to do a blanket canvas kind of survey across the state with our inspectors to find which ones are selling retail, which ones are commercial, which ones are free of charge, that sort of thing. So,
Fair enough. Follow-up question. And then, so if the fee on charging of 5 cents per kilowatt hour takes effect on 7/1 of 27, do you have a sense of kind of how far into kind of inspecting the portion of these that are private you'll be at that point, once we start charging on the charging?
I do not.
Okay.
Well, let's clarify, because the word private and public, I think, are confusing. So maybe, Brett, you describe for me, what is your definition of private versus public? We'll start with that, when you use those words.
Can I re-ask the question to the gentleman who asked me
Yep.
the question?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of those 2,770 at the just over 1,000 locations, how many of those will fall into your bucket for inspection as commercial? I mean, as
Yeah, maybe
selling the
commercial is a
electricity.
better word.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's, thank you for the clarification. So that's how I would define them, not necessarily public versus private, but if there's a commercial transaction taking place, those are the ones that would fall under our jurisdiction. And again, to answer your question, until we do a survey, I don't know how many of those will be affected.
Yeah, so actually, if we could agree on language moving forward. So I think we should use the word commercial to describe any charging station that anticipates or currently charges money for the charging. Does that sound like agreeable? Because you could have a public one that doesn't charge, you could have a private one that doesn't charge, and vice versa, right?
Correct.
Okay, so for purposes of discussion, we're going to use the word commercial as we move forward. Bentley, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering for the non-party staff, I mean, is there I don't have the statute in front of me, but is there something in statute we should peg this conversation to in the definitions? I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, it's a good question. Tom or Matt, anybody have feedback on that? I think it's important. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get this, let's agree on the language so we don't get confused. It's a good question, Bentley. So the question is, does the word commercial adequately describe those charging stations as we move forward that either charge money, okay, so that either assess a fee or in now or in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so the regular usage commercial would be correct, but there is a definition for this, and it's confusingly called public charging station.
Okay, well, that's okay. I think we just have to
So-
agree on what that means.
So it's a facility at which a person conducts for-profit business using electric vehicle supply equipment for the delivery of electricity sold as vehicle fuel to an electric vehicle and charges the customer for the electricity delivered.
Okay, so I think that was really important because now we're going to change that. So we're going to use the word public. Sir, you have an input?
Madam Chair, there's also a second part to that definition. Right underneath public charging station, there's a public charging operator definition that says a public charging station operator means any person who owns or operates the public charging in this state. So if a city hall or a state park owns or operates a public charging station, are they a person who conducts business? I'll get it even more confusing if a state park subcontracts with someone, but you're not paying for, who would be if a city hall or a state park subcontracts, who would pay that?
So that's a farther in the weeds question than I could answer at the moment. It might be a Department of Revenue question in how they implement the tax collection. So, just to back up a quick step, these two definitions are that's part of the tax imposition that was enacted in the transportation legislation that we had talked about. So those are terms being used or established in the motor fuels tax chapter for imposition of that tax. And then there are basically a couple of separate, similar but distinct definitions of terms from the weights and measures and commerce legislation that was enacted. So just that members of the working group are aware, there are sort of two different sets of terms that are specific to each of the policy provisions that were enacted.
So I would ask Tony, you're from Quick Trip, right? Tony, we really value that clarification from a major supplier's perspective. So would you mind either writing your question down or contacting me and me and Dan? I'm by no means trying to rush or anything here, but I think it's an important.
I completely understand that.
I think it's a really important clarification. So perhaps Danny Gillis and you and I can sit and just get that question first asked, and then we'll get an answer for, if not the next meeting, the meeting after, because I think it's an important thing as we move forward. We are having somebody from Iowa come speak. Our next meeting is actually pretty quickly, so if you haven't noticed, it's a week and a half from now, Monday, October 27th. We are going to have somebody from Iowa come talk about their, either online or Zoom, I'm not sure, but about their experience. And, given the prevalence of quick trips, frankly, I really value your asking this question because it's going to be somebody who's really involved in our implementation. And that is by no means meant to disregard Speedway or Holiday or anybody else out there. It's just we have somebody from industry right here. So let's get that question asked, and then we'll get the question answered. So it's two part. All right, you next, and then I'll go back to you. So go ahead, James.
Could we also see if we could find an answer to how many chargers this actually applies to? Because as I'm, Bentley, what were your?
The numbers?
Yeah, the numbers
Yeah,
that you were just.
2,770 charging ports at just over 1,000 locations.
So I'm just curious, if you whittle down which ones are below 50 kW, which ones don't require payment, and which ones were done before October 1st of 2023? How many are actually talking about?
So we're talking about how many will actually have to start charging for the kilowatt hour tax on
Right.
the date?
Because
Okay.
If you're before, where's the date? October of 2023, you're not charging until like 2031. So I'm just curious when you know, for a future meeting, if somebody can kind of.
Yeah, that's great. I know Danny is taking that note down.
Thank you.
We will put that in our list of questions. Actually, as we go till 11 o'clock today, if you have questions that you want answered, ask the question today. We may or may not be able to answer it today, but we are keeping a list, and we'll make sure that we come back to you with those. I think this is a complicated thing, and it's very reasonable that we don't have the answer today, but that these are some of the things we have to figure out. Okay, in the back.
No, I was just going to suggest, if it wasn't already in the plan, maybe it would be worthwhile to have the Department of Revenue come in and provide some information on their rulemaking process and all of this, just because I think that's going to be key to how this is implemented and how to, you know, wade through all these, at times, conflicting definitions.
Good feedback, which I'll say it at the end, but if you have other ideas for presenters or for questions, we want that information. So we've already received quite a few requests from committee members, and we're setting those presenters up. But if you have others, absolutely let us know. I know I have a question online. I think I'll let Representative Murphy go, and then we'll get back to the room. So Representative Murphy, welcome. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you early.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Earlier.
What was that?
I just said, I'm sorry I didn't introduce you earlier. So go ahead, and what's your
You're fine.
question?
Thank you. You know, just with the majority of the charging being done at homes, around probably 80%, do we have any plans as far as how that will work in? And I'm talking from the perspective of a commercial. You know, right now with 80% being done at home and 20 being done at this mix of commercial chargers, do we have any thoughts on how that might lay out?
Well, I've definitely thought about it. I don't know that we have an answer. Anybody in the room want to answer Representative Murphy with either additional thought or something to consider or insight? Go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Madam
Introduce
Chair.
yourself so he knows who you are.
Hi, Justin Emmerich here, Governor, appointed member of the public. My 2 cents is that since we're going refueling at private residences, there has to be a system for the public. If someone's skeptical that they're not getting the amount of electricity that they're getting charged for, there should be a public option for someone to contact either Weights and Measures, or I don't know if there's private companies that do this, but it would make sense that if someone's skeptical about it, that there's a way to resolve that. Thank you.
Any other insight? So Representative Murphy, we don't have an answer right now, but it's certainly something that we should be thinking about. And as an aside, I was remiss, because there's people online, if you ask a question, if you could introduce yourself first, that will help the people online know who we're all talking to and from. So we'll definitely put that on the list as something that we will try to resolve. I know Danny Gillis and I have been talking about it, and we talked about it during session as well. It is a complicated issue. Also, I do want to point out that, yes, Representative Murphy, you're correct, that right now, 80% of charging is done at home. I'm excited to see the increase in the charging options across the state, and I would not be surprised as more and more charging stations get built out, and as people buy more EVs, we're going to see even more options. The reality may be people charge at home because they don't have any, they're nervous about getting somewhere that there isn't a charging option. And so I won't be surprised if that number goes down and we see the number of public, commercial, whatever the word is, charging go up. So that'll be an interesting thing to see as we evolve. I promised I'd get back to the room, but I'm going to defer to Representative Elkins, who's also online. So welcome, Steve. Do you have a question?
I the presentation I'm going to give next time, I can address this question, actually.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, Representative Elkins is one of our presenters next time, so I'll look forward to what he has to say in response. Anything else you want to add, Representative?
No, well, I'll just add, as an AV owner who charges at home, we charge at home because it's very convenient. We just plug in at night and we come up in the morning, we have a full tank. And under the tariffs offered by Minnesota's electricity providers, it's very, very cheap to charge in home at night.
It is indeed cheap, but remember, even if you charge at home, you have to pay the electricity bill. So as somebody who's sensitive to the idea that roads are free, electricity is also not free. So let's just add that as an aside. But thanks, Steve. I look forward to your presentation.
There is a sales tax on all of the electricity that goes into EVs already, yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, so back to the room. Again, if I call on you, if you could introduce yourself. Oh, wait. Oh, does Senator Howe have a question? Yes. Okay, we're going to go to all the legislators online first. So Senator Howe, welcome, and I see you have a question.
Thank you. And so when I look at this, when you say you're only going to check, when Weights and Measures is only checking those commercial transactions, I would offer that, in my opinion, when you charge at home, that is still a commercial transaction. And that should be checked in some manner. So we have to look at that in the future.
Indeed, noted, especially given what I just said about we pay for every electric charge that comes out of our meter. I'm not sure how to even respond. Brett, what do you have to say about that?
That is a problem going forward that will need to be addressed. I don't know how to address it at this time.
Yeah, so Brett Wilhite, who's the division director at Weights and Measures, mentioned, he affirmed what you said, Senator Howe, that that is an issue, and we'll have to talk about that going forward. So I just want you to know that we noted it.
Thank you. And the other piece, isn't MPCA tracking that? I thought MPCA was tracking all of the charging stations that were going in, or was that a misconception on my part?
So does anybody know if MPCA is tracking the number of charging stations? We'll put that down as one of our questions, Senator Howe, but nobody in the room can, oh, wait, looks like Eric Rudin has some feedback.
Madam Chair, I think, again, they would be tracking like a public charging station. I don't think they're involved in tracking the number of home charging stations. I've not heard that, but we can certainly follow up with them.
Yeah, so we will follow up. We'll answer that question at the next meeting. That seems like a pretty easy one to answer. All right, back to the room. Again, if you ask a question, if you could introduce yourself first. So
Sorry,
to you.
Madam Chair. Jim Pierce with Excel Energy. I have a question for Brett. So some, especially like level 3 chargers, have a utility meter assigned directly to that asset. Others at a supermarket parking lot are not individually metered. They'd be metered if they're a commercial transaction. Maybe the meter is built into the charger itself. Do you distinguish, like in the testing procedure, because electric meters installed by the utility have a whole different regulatory structure by the commission, and we're obligated on a variety of fronts that way. Do you look at a station that is individually metered and the meters there different than one that would not have it built in or individually metered?
Thank you for the question. When we inspect a retail motor fuel dispenser, or when we begin to inspect EVSE equipment, we are checking the kilowatt hours versus the customer display, right? So even though the meter may be located in a different part of the system, what we're doing is we're checking the actual kilowatt hours delivered versus what the customer is told is delivered. And so if there is a discrepancy between those two, we're not going to go through and try to figure out where that discrepancy lies. We're going to leave that up to the repair company, the utility company, or the owner. But we're just going to report that there is a discrepancy.
Okay.
So
All right.
in that regard, they'd be treated the same.
Got it. Thank you.
So chair privilege, I'm just going to give a little feedback on Senator Howe's question to Brett. Who checks every meter on our house? I mean, that's just that would be impossible, right?
That's not our jurisdiction. I don't know who is responsible for that.
Excel Energy, James, do you know?
Well, again, that's a regulated part of our business through the Public Utilities Commission.
Yeah, so I think,
Meter accuracy standards that we have to abide by, and there's a whole complaint process established with the commission if there's a question about meter accuracy. And it does come up from time to time.
all right, well, still, Senator Howe, duly noted, we'll process that question and see what we come up with, but I think that may be opening a very large duty for us that I'm not sure how we would, how we'd figure out. All right, who else has a question in the room? Anybody? Austin, do we have any questions online, or DeMarco? Jeremy Neek online?
Hi, Jeremy Neek, Minnesota Department of Revenue, governor appointed to this commission. I've done limited research, and I've found approximately 89 level 3 charging stations that would potentially be subject to the 5-cent kilowatt hour tax when that goes into effect. We're also slowly trying to go through the laws that were written and try to get our interpretations of how we're going to contact station owners or charging owners to determine who's going to be licensed or not and who's going to pay the tax. And we're also working on our definition of legacy chargers. That's still in the works. Our legal team's working on that right now. Just the way the law is written, there's some interpretation involved, and we just want to make sure we have a consistent voice when we do roll out the tax in July of 2027.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Did I hear you right that you said there's only 89 level 3 chargers you could find?
Yes, it's very hard to find a complete list of charging stations within the state. We rely a lot on Department of Energy website. But yeah, it's very difficult, and that's one of our largest concerns when we roll out our licensing, starting in January 1st of 2027, is making sure we can find all the people that need to become licensed and potentially be responsible to pay the tax when it does go into effect.
All right, thanks. I'm just taking a note real quick. All right, given that, any other questions? All right, well, thank you, all three of you, very much. Brett, I appreciate your help on this because you're going to be busy once we get to the
You're welcome, Madam Chair.
to the next phase. Thank you. All right, our next presentation is online. We have Carolyn Kramer-Simons, who's a senior director responsible for investigating state funding policy at ARTBA, which is the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. And we've asked her to present today on state and local funding. And so this is in your packets. It is really what we wanted to see from ARTBA and from Carolyn is an overview of what's happening nationally and how we might be able to learn from other states. So Carolyn, I assume you're there?
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great,
And
wonderful.
if I need to interrupt you because we can't hear you or something, I will, but go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Please feel free if you don't see my slides advancing or you can't hear me, please feel free to let me know. First off, thank y'all so much for inviting me to share our information today. We're very grateful. We have some wonderful partnerships with AGC of Minnesota and the Minnesota Transportation Alliance. We really value those relationships and being able to help you all out. So as you all heard, I am Carolyn Kramer-Simons. I am the Senior Director of State Funding Policy with the American Road and Transportation Builders. About a decade and a half now, time flies. The American Road and Transportation Builders, or ARTBA, determined that they wanted to open up a department that focused solely on the state and local transportation funding issues, both legislative and ballot measures. So with that, we created our Transportation Investment Advocacy Center. I put the website up on this slide, so y'all have this information. Everything I talk about today is all publicly available on this website. We exist to help you guys get the information you need about transportation investments. So please feel free to visit there. I will also, when I conclude my presentation, I'll drop into the chat a few links. A lot of the information I'm going to discuss is also available via handouts, so you can have that information easily accessible and shareable. And I've been invited today to give that national overview of what states are doing to address electric vehicles and fuel-efficient vehicles and that erosion of transportation funding. So I just start off with the very basics of, we have 41 states currently that have an electric vehicle registration fee. 41 states, and that's every year we're adding a few more. So we expect to eventually see all of the states have some sort of electric vehicle registration fee. Why are states assessing an electric vehicle registration fee? It's easy. Most states have that vehicle registration fee already in place, so it's an additional fee on top of that. How do they pick the fee? It varies very much based on state. You have states as low as $50 in Colorado, and as high, as soon as the bill is signed into law, as $340 in Oregon or $290 in New Jersey. They're really trying to capture what that vehicle would have paid in fuel taxes if they drove a typical internal combustion engine vehicle. It really has changed quite a bit over time. Prior to 2017, we only had 10 states that had an electric vehicle registration fee. By 2018, that number doubled. 2019, 8 more states added in. It really started getting adopted very quickly nationwide. We are currently seeing, just like in Minnesota, states coming back to their electric vehicle registration fee and adjusting it to keep it in line with rising inflation, increasing gas taxes, things of that nature. Something that comes up frequently when you talk about electric vehicle registration fees is whether such a fee is fair for those vehicles. There's a lot of back and forth about that, but I just wanted to mention, and I spoke with Danny last week about this, there was a New York Times article that came out just a week or two ago that I thought was extremely interesting, that talked about what it costs for vehicles to fuel for 100 miles. So this isn't looking at vehicle costs, this isn't looking at registration fees, just what it costs to fuel your vehicle for 100 miles. The national average for electric vehicles that primarily rely on home charging was about $5.26 per 100 miles. $5.26 per 100 miles for the average, national average of electric vehicles. That changes a little bit depending on the cost of electricity in your state. In Minnesota, the average, they said, was about $4.77, so slightly lower than the national average. The national average for a gas vehicle to drive 100 miles is about $6.15 per 100 miles. So it's just slightly higher than what it costs for the electric vehicle that charges at home. And then looking at vehicles that rely solely on fast charging, just fast charging, so that's going to be a little bit of a higher premium than some electric vehicle charging stations, was a little bit higher at $15 per 100 miles. So just a little bit to show you that the fuel costs, even when you factor in the utility costs, are much lower for electric vehicles that primarily rely on home charging versus the average gas. I'm so sorry. That was the gas hybrid, $6.15 per 100 miles. The national average of gas for the standard vehicle was $12.80 per 100 miles. So it's certainly a big fuel savings for those vehicles that charge at home, according to the New York Times. I'm going to move ahead because I know what we're really talking about today are the electric vehicle charging station taxes or fees. And again, this is a topic that has become very popular in recent years for discussion. We have 10 states that have approved an electric vehicle charging station tax or fee. These are all, none of these are home charging stations. These are all ones that are available, like you said, publicly or commercially. We always get the question of, is there a way to tax electric vehicle charging at home? Currently, not to my knowledge. There are home charging stations you can install that would track that usage. But those are expensive. It can require some difficulty with upgrading home electric boxes. It's a difficulty for apartment dwellers, townhouses, things of that nature to install those devices. So currently, no, we don't really know of any way to really accurately capture electric vehicle home charging. But we do have 10 states that have assessed taxes or fees on public or commercial charging, so that's something that's available at a shared charging station. There are some great benefits to our knowledge. To our knowledge, this is really the only way to capture electric vehicles fueling up as they pass through your state. So electric vehicles, they're not going to pay the state gas tax, and that becomes a problem for states that do see a very large pass-through driving, tourism, freight, things of that nature. It's easy to understand. It's easy to explain to the public because you pay the gas tax at the pump, you pay your electric vehicle charging station tax when you fill up at the electric vehicle pump. So it's really easy to understand, but as y'all have touched on earlier, it also has a lot of challenges. Most electric vehicles primarily charge at home just because of ease of access. Multiple collection sites make it really difficult to monitor and collect the fees and ensure compliance. And the technology, not all stations currently have the technology. That is something that most new stations are putting in to assess the kilowatt hour usage. But older stations would have to make that upgrade. So I did want to share, and hopefully this came out clear, we do have that list of how states are assessing that tax or fee. I say tax or fee because it's not always exactly kilowatt hour usage. Sometimes it's a percent, but you can see here some of these states have indexed their charging station fee to track with their state gas tax. So a few different ways states are trying to make sure they're capturing that revenue, ensuring longevity of that revenue. And then briefly, because this does very much relate to electric vehicles, 4 states currently have a road usage charge program. This map has gotten a lot more colorful since I first created it. So just quickly, of those 4 states, we have Oregon, Utah, Hawaii, and Virginia. Oregon being the oldest program, and also currently pending final approval from the governor on legislation that will make their program mandatory for electric and hybrid vehicles. Hawaii currently is voluntary, but in the legislation that was approved to create the program, it created a gradual phase-in. It's so going from a voluntary road usage charge program to required for electric vehicles to required by 2033 for the general population. And then in Virginia and Utah, the program is voluntary. I'll talk a little bit more about Virginia shortly, but it's certainly, this is an area that states are exploring to really look at that lost revenue from electric and hybrid vehicles. And then Virginia. I live in Virginia, so I'm pretty familiar with its 3-part plan to make sure that all vehicles are paying their fair share. In Virginia, we have our state gas tax that's indexed to inflation. We have our voluntary road usage charge program that I mentioned. And we also have what is known as our highway use fee, which is a fee that's really meant to capture that lost revenue from vehicle fuel efficiency. As many people have stated, fuel efficient vehicles are just growing more fuel efficient over time. The whole fleet is growing more fuel efficient as new vehicles cycle in and older vehicles cycle out. So you're just seeing that increase in fuel efficiency that does erode at that buying power of the gas tax. The people are fueling less, they're paying less in the gas tax. In Virginia, to capture that lost revenue, they have determined a formula that is assessed on vehicles that are considered fuel efficient, which is 25 miles per gallon or better. And basically, I put the formula on there, but it's to capture the difference of what you would have paid if you drove a non-fuel efficient vehicle in your state gas tax. That's the simplest way to describe it. It's and it's efficient. It's in fiscal year 2023, it generated about $67 million for the states, and it is capped at $131.88, and that is the electric vehicle fee. So that's the top end of our fuel efficiency is our electric vehicles. So I just like to include that because it does go all the way up to electric vehicles, and it's the state's way of making sure that they capture that lost revenue. And then just looking at 2025 in particular, because this question of the growing fleet of electric vehicles and the passenger fleet and the interest in commercial fleet and expanding their electric vehicles, states really are grappling nationwide with how to make sure that these vehicles are paying their fair share to maintain the state's transportation infrastructure. So we had 18 states that introduced 35 bills related to electric vehicle fees this year. We have about 173 bills total introduced, so that definitely is a significant share of the bills that were introduced. And we saw a few different bills signed into law this year. 6 new registration fees were introduced, and 2 of them were signed into law. That's Rhode Island and Delaware as our most recent electric vehicle registration fee states. We saw 11 bills that would look to assess a tax or fee at public charging stations introduced, and 1 in Minnesota signed into law. 15 bills were introduced that they're going to raise existing electric vehicle fees, and 3 of them were approved. So again, we're at 41 states that have an electric vehicle registration fee, and then 3 of them increased the fee this year, including Minnesota. And then, like I said, the road usage charge program is being explored to look specifically at those electric vehicles to charge per mile driven, since they are not able to charge per fuel consumed. So we saw 6 bills introduced that would have explored this concept of a road usage charge for electric vehicles, and 1 was approved or soon to be approved in Oregon when the governor signs that bill into law. So this really is just a pressing issue nationwide, and states are looking at some more taking advantage of current revenue options like vehicle registration fees, and also exploring some more innovative strategies like road usage charges. So I don't want to talk too long, so I would love to be able to have some questions if there are. Hopefully there are some, and some dialogue. That's my contact information, but I'd love to hear from you all about anything that you have questions on.
All right, thanks, Carolyn. There are some questions in the room. So since I can see his name tag, Bentley Graves, I'll call on you.
Thank you. I'm Bentley Graves from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for this presentation. This is actually quite helpful in just kind of getting a better sense of the lay of the land around the country. But just a couple questions. One, so in Oregon, it sounds like that the bill making it mandatory is awaiting the governor's signature. Is that mandatory just for EVs?
Yes, so currently the program is a voluntary program for most vehicles. It would make all electric vehicles mandatory for participation, and you could choose 2 things. You could choose to do the road usage charge program and pay per mile driven, or you could pay the annual $340 fee. So it gives those 2 options for people that just don't want to do the road usage charge program. You can just pay the annual flat fee.
Thank you. And then Hawaii, I think you said it would be mandatory for all vehicles by 2033. When is it mandatory for EVs?
I think it's 2030.
Okay. And then the last question I had was for the, in Virginia, you said it was the road usage charge is capped at 138, which is the EV fee. So is that kind of essentially the same thing? You can either choose, you can choose one or the other?
Yes. So for Virginia's road usage charge program, you could pay your annual electric vehicle registration fee, which would be the cap, or you could pay per mile driven. Or you can, yes, basically, the highway use fee is your cap of what your vehicle would pay if you did the road usage charge program. But if you think that you drive less miles, this is their hook. If you feel that you drive less miles than the average vehicle, which is how they determine your highway use fee, then you think that you'll be able to save money by opting into the road usage charge program. But if you don't want to do the road usage charge program, then you can pay just your highway use fee, which is the cap for electric vehicles of $138.
And they track that. Is that how do they track the mileage? I mean, if you decide I think I'm going to do better by just limiting my travel this year, how do you substantiate that? How do they track that?
So you can do a few different options. You can do it by your odometer reading. You can get your odometer reading submitted, which has the challenge that that would still track if you were driving out of state, which in Virginia, when you have a lot of out of state, a lot of people from Northern Virginia, for instance, that work in DC or Maryland, you can't differentiate those miles. So that is the one challenge of accepting that version. Or you can have your miles tracked by a device that is put into your car.
All right, we have a question online. Carolyn Berninger, do you want to go next, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Carolyn, for the presentation. This is Carolyn Berninger. I'm with Drive Electric Minnesota. So first, I have a comment, and then I have a question. My comment is just around, wanted to push back a little bit on this discussion about fairness in taxation, and how it was presented as being related to fueling costs with the New York Times study. I just want to, note I don't necessarily see the connection between EV drivers having access to a lower cost fuel through electricity, kind of justifying EV owners paying disproportionately more in road taxes. I'm not saying that's exactly what you were saying, but I sort of, when hearing that connection, just kind of want to note, yes, EVs often do have a lower operating cost, but I think the taxation question should be separate from that. And then my question, which is somewhat related, is when you were presenting about the electric vehicle surcharges that exist in most states at the moment, you mentioned these surcharges are seeking to replace lost gas tax revenue. I'm curious if you have done research or have any information about, in those different states, how the average gas tax paid by conventional vehicle drivers compares to those EV fees.
So I have not done that research, and that's something I very much have been looking for to see the comparison. That New York Times article, which I'm very much believe that I can't take credit for that, because they won't share their data with me, and we're very much believers in always having the original data source. That's why I'm saying the New York Times article said that that is the best comparison I've found that looks at the fuel costs of ICE vehicles versus electric vehicles. And you can do the math based off of that, of what that vehicle would have paid, the difference between the ICE vehicle and the electric vehicle per mile, and try to get that based off of the average miles driven in the year. So you can do the math with that information. However, my big caveat is they have not shared their data set with me. And so they said they got it from, I think, AFI. But until I see their actual data set, I can't say that that's for certain the best way to look at it.
Okay, thank you.
I kind of like the ICE vehicle, makes it sound very interesting. So ICE stands for internal combustion engine, for anybody like me who had to think for 2 seconds about what she's talking about.
Yeah, sorry, I'm so
That's
used to the
okay.
acronyms.
It's good to remind people. Any other questions for Carolyn? Do we have anything online? Well, Carolyn, thank you very much. Really helpful. And I think Margaret Donahoe helped us get in touch with you. So Margaret, I appreciate your help there too. This is really informative, and I'm certain that at least I will be circling back with you for a little bit more detail on how we implement this and what we can learn from other states. So one more opportunity for questions. All right, we're doing great for time here. Our next speaker comes to us from the Humphrey School. So Camila Fonseca Sarmiento is going to give an overview on Minnesota roadway funding and some of the implications of this new law. And I think, or statute, I should say, Camilla is online, correct? All right, so with that, I will direct everybody in the room to your paper printouts. People online, I'm sure you have this as a attachment to your email. So Camilla, welcome.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for inviting me today to talk about this important topic. So I'm Camila Fonseca. I'm Director of Fiscal Research at the Institute for Urban and Regional Infrastructure Finance at the Humphrey School, University of Minnesota. So I'm going to be discussing about the Minnesota roadway funding. So an overview of what I'm going to be discussing today, kind of this research as part of a big program that we have that is called the Transportation Policy and Economic Competitiveness program at the Humphrey School, partnering with the Center for Transportation Studies. We're going to be talking about how Minnesota roadway funding works. So we're going to be looking into like the federal, the state, and the local sources that come into the roadway system. So I'm going to be talking mostly about the roadway. This is not related to transit. This is not related to freight. It's mostly roadway. And some alternative transportation funding sources that Caroline also discussed. So I'm just going to be touching on minor things that kind of complement what she just mentioned. So as I mentioned, we have this, the Transportation Policy and Economic Competitiveness program at the Humphrey School. And a part of that, we have 3 research areas. One of them is the finance part, which I am leading. And as part of that
I need to
area,
interrupt you. Can you share your presentation, Camilla?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Again, so she comes to us from the Transportation Policy and Economic Competitiveness Program. I think Frank Dauma is also involved as I think he's the lead project investigator.
Yes.
Isn't that correct, Camilla?
Yes,
Okay.
Frank Dauma is the principal investigator on this program.
Okay.
Sorry,
So now
I
we're
thought
seeing
it
your
was,
screen, so thank
yeah,
you.
sorry, I thought it was sharing
That's
my
okay.
screen. So as part of the finance part, we are compiling the Minnesota Transportation Finance Database. And with the data that we compile, we create a series of reports that touch on roadway funding, the redistribution of that funding, motorization trends. So all of them are available on our website. And I believe you all have access to that link. And if not, I can share that as well later. So when we talk about the Minnesota roadway funding, it really comes from like a combination of different sources that are from the federal, the state, and the local level. So when we talk about the federal sources, most of the funding comes from the federal motor fuel tax, and a little portion on the taxes that are charged on heavy trucks, trailers, and truck tires. And kind of recently, there has been transfers from the U.S. Treasury General Fund that has been like consistently going through the Highway Trust Fund. So all of the monies that different states collect are deposited in the Highway Trust Fund, and these are distributed to formula to all the states. So at least for Minnesota, the total funding that comes from the federal funding, 87% comes from the highway account, that is mostly construction maintenance for the highway, and 13% that comes from the mass transit account that goes for transit purposes. In 2023, the amount that was portioned through the federal funding was 881 million, and it comes in different programs. So 85% of the funding that Minnesota received is through the National Highway Performance Program, the one in yellow in this graph, and the Surface Transportation Block Grant, that is kind of the light green in this graph. So the National Highway Performance Program is mostly to support the national highway system, and the Surface Transportation Block Grant has funding to support state and local transportation needs, such as bridges, but it also provides some funding for transportation alternatives, such as walking and biking. And then the other funding sources that are there are related to reduce traffic fatalities, kind of climate in parts of the highway, and others. So something to highlight from this federal funding that comes to Minnesota is that it has been very steady. It has been remained kind of consistently across the years. And we see some changes kind of very recent, but the overall trend is very stable. When we compare what different states put into the fund and what they receive from the fund compared to what they are putting into the highway trust fund, we create this ratio of apportioned funds and receipts from the highway account. So when we look that into all the states across the United States, we see that the ratio is always higher than 1. So the portion what they have been receiving is more than what they're putting in, but that is mostly because of the transfers that are put from the general fund at the federal level. And in the distribution, Minnesota always ranks kind of in the middle. So in 2023, we rank at 23rd in federal funding. So that is how kind of Minnesota compares to other states with regards to the funding that is received, or like a portion through the federal sources. When we talk about the state level, there are, or like the traditional funding sources that have been in place are the state motor fuel tax, the registration tax or the TAP fee, and the motor vehicle sales tax. So these have been the traditional. We call these the highway special revenues. All the revenues from these are deposited into the highway fund. And then recently, there have been other taxes that have been kind of allocated for like roadway purposes. So that includes the motor vehicle sales tax, lease sales tax, the short-term rental tax, the automotive parts sales tax. In 2023, there was introduced the retail delivery fee, and I'm going to put here a caveat, the regional transportation sales tax, that most of it goes for transit purposes, but there is like a 17% that goes to metropolitan counties, and about 40% of that goes for roadway reconstruction. So there's still like a portion of that amount that goes for roadway purposes. So these are kind of partially dedicated to the highway. So when we look into like the highway special revenue, so here I'm introducing as well, like comparing with the federal fuel tax that we are receiving, we see that overall, like since 1975, the revenue has been increasing, as you see in this graph. But it has been like the rate at it increases, it has been decreasing. So let's say it has been increasing 3.9% on average since 2010, but that growth has been less and less in recent years. When we look into the motor fuel tax used to be the most important sources for transportation funding. So before 2020, like between 2010 and 2020, it was growing on an average of 2%. But after 2020, it has been decreasing on an average of 1%. If we remove 2020, that was the year of the pandemic, we see kind of an average growth of about 0.4% in the recent years. So that's kind of the trends that we see in the state fuel tax. When we compare these as a share of the total revenue that is received for highway purposes, something that I wanted to highlight is kind of that share that the motor fuel tax at the state level had before. So before used to be around like 40%, 50% of the total funding. In 2024, it made about 33% of the total funding. And the registration fee made the other 33%. So we see kind of that replacement or like a reaccommodation adjustment of the funding in Minnesota, in which the fuel tax has been taking like less importance on the total. Yes, ma'am?
You said it used to be 40%, now it's, did you say 23 or 33?
33.
33, okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, not. So how it is distributed? So as I mentioned, like all of the revenue funding the revenue sources that I mentioned, they are going to be deposited into the highway user tax distribution fund, and all of it goes distributed to, or like 95% goes distributed to the state aid system. So there is a big component of that into the county state aid, and another portion on the municipal state aid street fund. And there is kind of 5% of that money that goes into the flexible highway account, their town road account, and the bridge account. So all of it for construction, maintenance, reconstruction, repairs of the highway system. Then in 2023, the legislation also established the Transportation Advancement Account, the TAA. So this one is to provide funding to local agencies for their transportation purposes. The money that comes to this account comes from the automotive parts sales taxes and the retail delivery fee. So both are effective in fiscal year 2024. From the automotive parts sales tax, about 43% of the funding received is coming into this account, and 100% of the retail delivery fee is coming to this account. This is how the funds are distributed based on the 2023 session estimates. So the amount of funding that is going to be provided to these transportation advancement accounts is going to be increasing. 36% goes to the metropolitan counties, and 40% of that amount goes for roadway reconstruction, repair, rehabilitation. 27% of the total funding goes to the small cities assistance account, and this is very important, and this is new because it goes to support maintenance and construction of the roadways of the cities that have populations of less than 5,000 people. So this is something that has been, or that we in our research we're going to be looking further to, like what is the impact of that additional research provided to small cities that are not in the state aid system. 15% of the total amount goes to larger cities. And that also goes for roadway maintenance and construction of municipal state aid streets. 11% goes to town roads account, so that also supports all the roads in townships. 10% goes to the CASA fund, so that supports the county state aid system. And just 1% goes to food delivery support account, and that's to support DHA's food delivery, but it's like a very, very small portion. So again, this is kind of introduced in 2023 that goes into funding mostly the small cities and localities. And finally, when we talk about the local part, kind of the revenues that are essentially going for transportation includes the local option sales tax, the wheelage tax, the excise tax, and the gravel tax. But kind of the big portion comes from the general fund, which includes revenues from property taxes, from special assessments, and from sales tax. So when we look into like the total amount of expenditures in state and local expenditures in Minnesota, and we look into the roadway expenditures, we see that about like 4 to 5% is coming from those localities, townships, cities, and counties, and about kind of 3% more is coming from the state level. So like the majority of those expenditures are supported through local revenues. So that's kind of how funding works of the roadway system works in Minnesota. So we have federal, state, and local sources that are supporting construction, roadway maintenance, and at different levels for its government. And then the other part that we wanted to discuss today a little bit was the alternative funding sources. So as I mentioned, Caroline already kind of provided much of that information. So some of the alternative funding that we have been tracking are the special registration fee for hybrid and electric vehicles, the tax on electricity as a vehicle fuel that was also implemented here in Minnesota, and roadway user charges. Some of them have been implemented already, and some of them, especially the roadway user charge, is being understudied for like a large number of states across the U.S. So when we talk about the special registration fee and electrical, the registration fee, we are separating between those states that are charging just electric vehicles or just vehicles that are running out of electricity, and the states that are also kind of imposing a fee on hybrid vehicles in the U.S. So this is information from 2023. Caroline presented more updated information. We had 33 states that have imposed a fee on only electric vehicles, and then 21 more have adopted fees on hybrid vehicles. And as Caroline mentioned, most of them have been considering since 2011, but in 2017 and 2019, there was a significant growth in the number of states that adopted that fee. So we were looking into what is the annual rate that electric vehicles will have paid in these states. So again, this is information for 2023. We are updating these graphs to reflect new legislations in all the states. So the fee goes from $50 to about $210 in Georgia, and the average is around $126 per electric vehicle. Minnesota at that time had the $75 amount, so it was kind of in the lower bound of the fee. And then the legislation introduced this year introduced a new change, so it's going to be effective on January next year, and it's kind of the graded in between 0.5% of the manufacturer's suggested retail price, and is multiplied by a percentage that is determined by the age of the vehicle. So every year, additional year on the age of the vehicle will decrease kind of the percentage in which it is multiplied, or like a flat fee, or $150 between January 2026 and June 2027, or $100 starting in July 2027. On the other side, when we look only into those that are including surcharge for hybrid vehicles, so as I mentioned, there are 21 states that have included that in 2023. That fee goes from, or like varies between $30 in South Carolina to $150 in Washington, and the average is about like $68 per hybrid vehicle. One thing to notice here, so compared to electric vehicle fee that I showed in the previous slide, the fee on hybrid electric vehicles is lower, and that is just to kind of reflect that a part of those vehicles is still paying the motor fuel tax. And then the other thing that I wanted to recognize from these states that are charging these surcharges in hybrid vehicles, it's kind of the definition that they use for hybrid. 9 states kind of cite hybrid vehicles in general, so it's very kind of broad, the definition. And then in 9 states, they have been specifically talking about plug-in hybrid vehicles. So it's not all of them, it's just a portion of those hybrid vehicles. Utah and Kansas are the ones who specifically refer to both types of vehicle. Again, due to legislation changes introduced in this session, starting on January 2026, where Minnesota is going to have a surcharge for hybrid electric vehicles. So it will be the greater in between, again, an amount that is determined by the manufacturer's suggested retail price, and a flat fee of $75 between January and 2026 and June 2027, or 50 flat fee starting in July 2027. The other tax that has been recently introduced is the tax on electricity as a vehicle fuel. So as Caroline mentioned, right now we have 9 states that have that amount or like that tax. Most of them are charging like a fee per kilowatt hour. Only one state, Utah, has a percentage of the total sale. These have been very recently adopted, so we are trying to find information of what's the total amount of money that the fee is bringing into the transportation system. And the other thing that we are tracking is the use of the funding. So most of them, in most of the states, this new revenue is going to support transportation purposes, like roadway maintenance, repair, going for highways, bridges. So it's basically for transportation purposes. There is only one, Nebraska, in which the funding goes directly to the general fund. And in Georgia, it is mentioned that it goes to the transportation funding, but it could also go to the general fund. So kind of things to highlight in that part. Again, starting in or like due to the new Minnesota legislation in 2025, there is going to be a tax on electricity starting in 2027. So it will be 5 cents per kilowatt hour for charging stations or like charging in public charging stations. And then the last alternative transportation mechanisms that we have been following is the roadway user charges. So right now there are several states that have been exploring the road charge. Some of them have a road charge pilot. Here in Minnesota, we are also having our own demonstration, and we're part of the team that is evaluating that part. Kind of as Caroline mentioned, in Hawaii is going to be mandatory. Right now, they're just charging electric vehicles, and they pay about 0.8 cents per mile. Oregon is the kind of the oldest one, or like the leading state in this roadway user charge part. Right now, they are, it's like a voluntary program. And they are accepting electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, vehicles that are powered by gas and by diesel, rated at 20 miles per gallon or better. And they pay per mile that they drive, they pay 2.3 cents. Utah also has a voluntary program. So they are only working with electric vehicles, and electric vehicles are paying about 1.1 cents per mile. And then, as Caroline mentioned, Virginia is another one. Right now, they're looking into like fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles. And the fee, it really depends on the MPG of the vehicle. So Caroline kind of mentioned the huge equation that they are looking at, but they have some tables in which they provide like what's the minimum amount of funding that they will be providing and the maximum. So in the year one, they are expecting an amount that it varies between $6 to $100, and in the third year, that will increase to about like 20 years to $20 and $300. So that is kind of the other funding source that has been explored. So with that, I welcome any questions, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Camilla. That's excellent. Are there any questions online or in the room for Camilla? Okay, I see Representative Murphy has a question online. Representative?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Sarmiento. My question is with regard to the 5 cents per kilowatt and looking at federal funding and just the federal receipts that are taken from our gas. Does the 5 cents per kilowatt, is that accounted for in Minnesota for that federal number as well?
No, sir. This is just what goes into the federal from the motor fuel tax in 2023. So that is not accounting that 5 cents per kilowatt hour.
Representative Murphy, do you have other follow-up?
No, I think that would be good. In general, I kind of knew that to be true, and I think that's a concern, because there's a fair amount of funding there. Is it changing our funding over time, as we edge more toward EVs or not? And I think that's going to be a number we're going to want to know what it looks like. So that was my thought in asking that question.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yep.
Any other questions online? No? Okay. Eric Rudin from MnDOT.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And that, I was kind of thinking about the federal funding during the ARTBA presentation as well, because right now there is no federal charge on EVs, really. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about a distance-based fee or road user charge. I think the U.S. House actually passed legislation that would have had a national surcharge on EV registration annually, and I think it was pretty substantial. So, I don't think it's necessarily something we have to base our committee's work on, but just something to be aware of, because I think if there is federal legislation enacted, at some point it's going to sort of force the states to reconsider the rates at which they set their charges to sort of make sure we're being fair and balanced with the total charge that EV owners are paying.
Yeah, acknowledged. I know all during session we were monitoring that, and I'm sure we'll continue to watch and see what happens if and when the federal government starts to function again. Just kidding, of course they will. But that is something that we'll be watching, because I know it was a pretty significant concern this last May as we were talking about additional burden and whether it would show up at the federal level. Correct. Thanks, Eric. Any other feedback? Yes? Tony, introduce yourself.
Sarmiento from, Tony Colas from Quick Trip. You had a chart, I think there's 9 states on there with various tax amounts on, some of them are per kilowatt hour, not all of them. The first question is, would 5 cents be the largest kilowatt hour tax in the nation? Or is there more states on this that you just picked 9, or would 5 cents be would be the highest in the nation?
Yeah, the 5 cents will be the highest in the nation.
And then,
yeah, the average, or at least what has been kind of been the rate selected by this state is 3 cents. So it's a little bit higher. Yes, in Utah is 12.5% of the total sale. So I don't know how that will translate into 5 cents, like into the census scale. But I can check about that. But yeah, at least for the ones that we have, is the highest.
and then the chart, thank you for putting that together. I was curious, some of these have already taken effect, Iowa, Montana, and we're going to get a presentation from Iowa, I think, at our next meeting. I'd also like to throw in, I think we should throw Wisconsin in there, and I can help Danny with that. But do you know the revenue that's been raised through Montana, Kentucky, Iowa up to this point?
Yeah, no, that's something that we have been trying to find information from. We only have estimates of what they were expecting, but not really like the full amount. So when they start, it's something about around like $500,000, and it goes up to like 1 million. But we couldn't find any information to kind of actually say like this is the full amount of money that has been raised through this tax.
Tony, any more questions? All right, and I heard what you said about Wisconsin. Okay, I think we tried and we settled on Iowa just due to availability, but of course we will continue to take recommendations for speakers. Carolyn Simmons online has a question. Carolyn?
Hey, sorry, I did want to add on that revenue question. Like Camilla said, it is very hard to find some of these estimates because it's such a new tax and it's still being implemented. but the Wisconsin fiscal note attached to the bill that was approved was estimating about 286,000 for 2024, looking at about 25,000 passenger electric vehicles.
Oh, thanks for that, Carolyn. And that's a fiscal note or a revenue note, so that would just be an estimate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions for Camilla? As you ponder, I do want to draw attention, Camilla, thanks for sending us a printout of some of the information on the Transportation Policy and Economic Competitiveness Program website. So you have that as an additional handout. It has some definitions in it and provides some interesting and informative information. I also want to bring up that each one of these speakers, I really appreciate your expertise, and we may come back to you with questions or additional clarifications. So anybody who needs follow-up or a question for any of them, send it to both me and Danny Gillis, and we'll make sure that we get those questions addressed. Some things come to us a little bit later as we're driving or thinking about things, so I welcome any clarifications. Any other questions for Camilla? And thank you very much for your expertise, Camilla. I appreciate the work you're doing. I don't see any questions in the room, so with that, we are just a little bit early, but before you get up, let's just remind everybody that our next meeting is not very far from today. It's just 10 days away on Monday, October 27th at 9 o'clock. I presume we're in the same room? Yep, we will be meeting here in the same room. The reason we have two meetings in October is we want to make sure that we get plenty of work done before the holiday season. And so I'm not sure that we'll always be meeting every week and a half. In fact, I know we won't, but if you'll indulge us, we're trying to get some introductory information out to everybody so that we have an understanding of the current state of affairs and where we'll be moving shortly after the new year. And then we also want to learn from the states that are already working to incorporate some of these changes. In light of that, our Vice Chair, Representative Steve Elkins, is going to be speaking to us on the 27th, highlighting some of the research he's done. He's been quite involved in looking at opportunities for us to change our policies around revenue and EVs. So Representative Elkins will be on the agenda. Then we have presentations from Drive Electric and Fresh Energy, so I'm excited about that. And then as noted earlier, we are going to bring in somebody from Iowa who's going to talk about their experience in charging per kilowatt hours. We think that'll fill out the 2 hours we have. We'll also try to answer some of the questions that came up today, or at least give you an overview of what those questions are, and we'll start to keep a running assessment of what we need to look at and either just investigate and ponder or actually ask. Some of the information just isn't available yet, but it's good for us to know. And then if any of you have ideas for other presentations or experts that you think would be useful, if any of the members of the working group have insight and want to be on our presenter list, I do welcome that. So I consider myself to be in fact-finding mode right now for the first month. And so we'll be really focusing on that through the end of October. And then as we get closer to our deadline, we'll start to explore some other more detailed issues. So before we adjourn, is there any other questions or comments from anybody in the room? Laura, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laura Ziegler with AGC. Do you have any insight into November, December schedules, 1 or 2 meetings?
We do have a little bit. Danny Gillis, can you help me with that? We have one meeting that's preliminary scheduled in November, correct?
Yeah, so far we have dates for our next 2 meetings. I think those have gone out to members. Austin, is that correct?
But one in November, one in December, or 2 in November?
Well, the October 27th and then a November meeting. We'll make sure those get out by the end of the day today if they haven't already. We have not worked on scheduling past that point, but it's something we'll definitely be talking about and hopefully have updates by the 27th, if not before then.
Yeah, so Laura, to your question, I know we have a meeting in the first half of November. I think given the holidays that are coming up, it may be unrealistic for us to squeeze in 2 more before Christmas, but I think that may be our intent. So that means either 2 in November, 1 in December, or 1 in November, 2 in December. We're going to try to get, at least I think, we'll try to get 3 more meetings in, 4 more meetings before the end of the year. So October 27th, whatever date it is in early-ish November, which I can't remember, so I'm not going to speak it out loud. And then possibly 2 more meetings, if we can squeeze them in before late December. We'll get those dates out to you as soon as possible, because frankly, we'll have them. And so I just want to share them with everybody so that they're as planful as they can be. Any other questions? All right, well, with that, the next meeting of this working group is scheduled for Monday, October 27th at 9 a.m. A thank you to everyone who attended and to our presenters, and the meeting is adjourned.